In October of 1969, the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was released. It starred Paul Newman, Robert Redford, and Catherine Ross. Now, who can forget the last scene from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, facing the Bolivian army with guns a-blazing? That was a great movie. However, it was a movie. This is not. Robert Leroy Parker was born April 13, 1866, into a Mormon family in Beaver, Utah. Maximilian Parker, Robert Leroy's father, will soon move his little family to a farm 20 miles away to the small community of Circleville. Robert Leroy was devoted to his mother, Annis Gillis Parker. He was the oldest of 13 children. The Parkers' farm and ranch is located 2 miles south of the small town of Circleville, Utah. The cabin that they lived in is still standing. The Parkers' old home place is now being restored. Robert Leroy's sister, Lula, said that Robert Leroy and their mother planted some of the trees that's still growing around the old cabin. Now, walking around and looking through the window, it looks like it's a one-room cabin, but actually, at the time, it had 2 rooms. Robert Leroy once said that this was the place that he was the most happiest. The Parkers raised wheat and cattle. Life was hard, and the weather was harder. Summer droughts caused the wheat crops to fail. Winter cold would cause the cattle to die. Maximilian Parker, or Max as the locals called him, had to take a job sometimes away from home. Even Robert Leroy and his mother Annie worked on the Marshall Ranch some 8 miles south in order just to make ends meet. When Robert Leroy was working at one of these local ranches, he met cowhand and small-time rustler Mike Cassidy. He will later take the alias Butch Cassidy in remembrance of his old friend. In 1884, when Parker reached the age of 18, he left this farm and ranch. For the next few years, he'll work in mining towns and own cattle ranches in Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. Parker had already learned the outlaw trade of stealing horses and stray cattle. It's believed by the neighbors, stating that he would sometimes sneak back home from time to time and most likely bring money to the family. He was an experienced cowhand working numerous ranches, and he was always well liked by his bosses, and they always spoke well of him. If he gave his word, he kept it. And by 1889, Cassidy was working around Telluride, Colorado. He had been working for Harry Adis at his ranch and was very familiar with the landscape. He also knew that there was money from the gold and silver mines that were being stored in the San Miguel Valley Bank. It is believed that on July the 24th, 1889, that Robert Leroy Parker, Matt Warner, and Tom McCarty rode into Telluride, Colorado with the intentions of robbing the San Miguel Bank. The town had one road in and one road out. Not much has actually changed, except the horses have turned to cars and the dirt streets are now paved. The white building across the street was the location of the bank. Parker and Warner went inside while Tom stayed outside with the horses. They knew when it was most likely to be empty of customers. They simply placed a gun to the banker's head and demanded that he open this very safe right here. Parker later called himself Butch Cassidy, and he'll become the most successful outlaw in the West. Parker was known to plan his robberies down to the least details, and even stationing fresh horses, which was a novel idea at the time, every 20 miles apart for their getaway. They relieved the bank of $20,000, which now would equal $500,000. Now this is believed to be Butch Cassidy's first bank robbery. Unfortunately, on their way out of town, in the direction that we're riding now, they will meet Harry Adis on their way out that Parker and Warner had worked for. Knowing that he had recognized them and would certainly tell the sheriff, they knew that there was no turning back now from the outlaw life. They could have killed Adis to hide their identity, but they didn't. The outlaws headed for a safe place to lay low. And in 1890, with money from the robbery, Butch will buy a ranch outside of Du Bois, Wyoming. He will continue rustling cattle, and some believe that the ranch was just a forest for his illegal activities. In 1894, Butch Cassidy, as he began to call himself, to protect his family name, Butch had been doing business with Herb Bassett and his two daughters. The Bassetts supplied outlaws with beef and horses. Now that fall, Butch meets William Ellsworth Lay. Elzy Lay will become Butch's best friend. They were both easygoing, and they didn't like trouble. Elzy will become involved with Josie Bassett, and Butch will be romantically connected with Josie's 15-year-old sister, Ann. Word began to spread around about the smooth bank robbery out of Telluride, Colorado, and outlaws wanted to join Butch for his smart way of planning jobs. Cassidy believed that if you plan good enough, you can rob banks and trains without anyone getting hurt or anyone getting caught. However, in 1894, Butch was convicted of paying $5 to Billy Nutcher for a stolen horse. He'll be given a 5-year sentence by Judge Jesse Knight and incarcerated at the Territorial Prison here in Laramie, Wyoming. Now this is Butch's prison picture. He was 29 years old at the time. The story goes that Butch asked to be released one night before going to prison. He gave his word that he'd come back the next morning, and he did. He will serve 18 months, and a judge was impressed by Cassidy's charisma and intelligence. Judge Knight told the governor, William Richards, that he thought he had made a mistake by not informing the jury that you must know the horse was stolen, and he said that he wasn't sure that Cassidy actually knew. Butch was offered a pardon if he had promised to go straight. Butch said no, but he would promise not to rob anymore in Wyoming. They agreed. When Butch was released in 1896, he learned that his friend Matt Warner, along with Bill Walls, had been charged with murder. It seems that a miner by the name of E.B. Coleman hired the two to discourage the Stanton brothers and David Milton from following him to his secret mining location. He even tried to pay the Stantons to leave him alone, but they continued to follow him. Matt said that they rode into the Stanton camp just to scare him, but that Stanton started firing first. Matt was arrested, and he said it was because of his outlaw reputation. Butch Cassidy wrote Matt's wife not to worry. Matt will have the best lawyer that can be found. Butch, Elzy Lay, and Bob Meeks rides into Montpelier, Idaho, intended on robbing the bank for bail money and lawyer's fee for Matt Warner. They ride up and tie their horses across the street from the bank. Meeks will attend the horses. Butch and Lay will enter the bank. Elzy Lay will demand the banker, one customer, and a bookkeeper up against the wall, while Cassidy goes for the money. Butch then will walk very slow with the money across to his horse, get up on it, and slowly leave town. The banker glances out the window, sees Bob Meeks' uncovered face holding the horses. That's before Elzy Lay strikes him across the head to look forward. Bob then brings Elzy's horse over in front of the bank, and then he rides out easy. Elzy Lay then comes out and rides out hard. Bob will be identified by the banker later and arrested and convicted of robbery. But the attorney will get the money. The attorney, Orlando Powers, will get the charges for Matt Warner dropped down from murder to manslaughter. He'll be sent to prison, sentenced for 5 years, but will serve a little over 3. Matt Warner will quit the outlaw life after serving time and will eventually become a respected lawman. Matt and Bill Wells' attorney, Orlando Powers, will swear that the $3,000 they were paid to defend Matt and Bill was paid before the Montpelier bank robbery. After Montpelier, Butch Cassidy and Elzy Lay will head for Robber's Roost to hide out. They will be joined by Ann Bassett and Elzy's wife, Maud Davis. After a few months, the women will be sent home so that Butch and Elzy can do another job that they planned. On April the 21st, 1897, Butch Cassidy and Elzy Lay robbed the Pleasant Valley Coal Company of their payroll, around $7,000 in gold, at Castle Gate, Utah. It was a bold daylight robbery and well planned. They cut telegraph wires and stationed fresh horses, and then they head back to their hideout. By now, Butch had taken in members of what will become known as the Wild Bunch, such as Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid. Longabaugh had been caught stealing horses from the 3V Ranch in February of 1887. He served 18 months of a 2-year sentence in jail at Sundance, Wyoming, gaining the nickname Sundance Kid. It was the only time that he'll ever be arrested. Upon his release in 1889, he'll go straight for a while, but unable to get a ranch job, on November 29, 1892, with 2 unemployed cowboys, they try robbing a train that has no money on it. Their mask keeps slipping down off their face and was seen by the railroad crew. Their haul was a little over $8. Sundance's 2 friends go back into town after the robbery and was promptly arrested. They gave the name of Sundance to the law. He then had to head out for a place to hide, ending up with the Wild Bunch. It's been reported that the Wild Bunch only allowed 5 women to ever visit their hiding places, such as Brown's Park, Robber's Roost, and Hole in the Wall, if they're all along the Outlaw Trail. Josie and Sister Ann Bassett, Etta Place, Maud Davis, and Laura Bullen was the only ones. Josie Bassett will become girlfriend to Elzy Lay. Butch Cassidy will become involved with Ann Bassett. When Butch goes off to prison for that 18 months, Ann takes up with Ben Kilpatrick. And when Butch got out, Josie was involved with Will News Carter. Josie ended the relationship with Carter when she found out that he was involved with Laura Bullen, his deceased wife's niece. Now, for a while, Butch and Josie got together, and then he went back to Ann. Elzy Lay will marry Maud Davis, and Etta Place will be with Sundance. There's no record of any animosity among the group. On June the 2nd, 1899, near Wilcox, Wyoming, at 2:15 a.m., 2 men, flagged down with lanterns, stopping the Union Pacific Overland Flyer right before a bridge, causing the engineer to believe that the bridge might be out. The outlaws commandeered the train and separated the express car with the safe and the engine from the passenger car. The outlaws, 6 in all, used too much dynamite when C.W. Woodcock refused to open the door, and they destroyed the express car. Although Woodcock wasn't hurt, just dazed, Cassidy and his gang got away with $50,000 in banknotes and gold, amounting to $1 million today. The outlaws head north towards the Hole in the Wall hideout. The group splits up as was their normal routine. And on June the 6th, Sheriff Josiah Hazen runs into Flat-Nosed Curry, Harvey Logan, and Sundance Kid, some 75 miles from the robbery site. Harry Logan shoots and kills Sheriff Hazen, and the trio is able to escape on foot. They receive help from local ranchers when the marshals, led by Joe LaFleur, trail the robbers through the Brock Ranch near Buffalo, Wyoming. The posse took nearly all the Brock family's food and blankets. Rancher Elmer Brock stated that with all the outlaws that traveled and come through and across his ranch, it had to be the U.S. Marshals that stole from him, showing the ranchers' attitude towards the local law. After the Wilcox robbery, the Union Pacific was determined to stop these train robberies. It was costing them business and money. Serial numbers from the banknotes and burnt bills was posted everywhere. The Union Pacific employed the Pinkerton Detective Agency and over 100 agents with Joe LaFleur, Charles Siringo, and even Tom Horn. They will chase the wild bunch from Wyoming to Texas. They began stationing men and horses in special rail cars just to chase the outlaws. It is believed that Butch called on his old attorney friend Douglas A. Preston to help him launder the money. He needed the money clean because 2 months after the Wilcox robbery, his friend Elzy Lay had taken part in a train robbery near Folsom, New Mexico territory. A shootout with the trailing posse ended up with the death of Sheriff Ed Farr. Lay was captured in Carlsbad, New Mexico, buying supplies and charged with murder. It is believed that he was booked under the name of William McGinnis. It's also believed that a payoff was arranged and Elzy Lay received life sentence instead of death by hanging on August the 16th, 1899. The loss of Butch Cassidy's best friend, Elzy Lay, to life in prison was a blow to Butch. It is believed that Butch may have paid money to officials in order to get Elzy Lay pardoned after serving 7 years on January the 10th, 1906, and by this time Butch was already in South America. The story goes that prisoners held the warden's wife and child hostage, and Elzy Lay talked the prisoners into releasing them. He was given a pardon. Now, while in prison, Lay's wife, Maud Davis, will divorce him. They had 1 child. Later, Elzy Lay will marry Mary Calvert. They will have 2 children, and Elzy Lay will go straight and never rob again. He will pass away on November the 10th, 1934, in Los Angeles at the age of 64. He's buried at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Butch had lost his 2 closest friends in Elzy Lay in prison and Matt Warner giving up his outlaw ways for family life. He knew it was time to quit. The West was changing and it was just a matter of time before the law caught up. Butch contacted Judge Orlando Powers and convinced him that he wanted to go straight and possibly amnesty. Powers was the attorney that had represented Matt Warner, if you remember, but was now judge in Salt Lake City. Powers approached the Governor Wells without success. However, he did suggest a meeting with the Union Pacific officials and stated that if they were lucky, they might even offer Butch a job as a railroad guard. The railroad agreed to a meeting, and the meeting was set up at a stagecoach station 1 day's ride north of Rawlins, Wyoming. Butch arrived early and waited all day, but no one showed up. Afraid that he was being set up, he left a note under a rock where he knew it'd be seen. Butch's lawyer, Douglas A. Preston, was supposed to accompany the railroad officials. The note said, "Damn you, Preston, you've double-crossed me. I waited all day, but you didn't show up. Tell the Union Pacific to go to hell, and you can go with them." Now, Preston tried to contact Butch through his old friend Matt Warner, but was unable to do so. He wanted to explain that they had been delayed 1 day because of a flood. On August the 29th, 1900, again the Union Pacific Express train was robbed close to Tipton, Wyoming. This time the express car was carrying $50,000 in gold. The robbery was better planned with fresh horses. The gang once again eluded the posse, and shortly after it is believed the outlaws robbed the Winnemucca, Nevada First National Bank of $33,000. 1 month after the Winnemucca robbery, 5 members of the Wild Bunch will meet in Fort Worth, Texas, all dressed up and sporting their newfound wealth. They had this photo taken at John Schwartz's photo studio, located at 705 1/2 Main Street, upstairs over a saloon. It was located on the edge of the Red Light District known as Hell's Half Acre, where outlaws and cowboys came to spend their money. Fort Worth had Mary Porter's brothel. She is sometimes confused with Fanny Porter's place in San Antonio that was favored by the Wild Bunch. Several of Fanny's girls became girlfriends of the members of the gang, and in February of 1901, she threw a party for the Wild Bunch. Now this is Fanny's photo kept by Pinkertons. Even William Pinkerton, head of the Pinkerton agency, visited Fanny's place asking about the outlaws. And it's believed that the Wild Bunch had been in Fort Worth for at least a month when they decided to have this picture made. Now on the front row left is Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid. They all used aliases to help hide their real identity. And next to him is Ben Kilpatrick, called the Tall Texan because he stood 6 foot and 2 inches tall. And Robert Leroy Parker, of course, Butch Cassidy. On the back row left is Will Carver. They called him News Carver because he liked to read about himself in the newspaper. And then Harvey Logan, known as Kid Curry, probably the most dangerous of all the Wild Bunch. He's been described as a pathological killer. The story goes that the photographer placed the picture of the Wild Bunch in the window of his shop, and the detective just happened to see it and recognize one of the men. A more likely story is that the boys said or did something to cause the photographer to become suspicious. After all, the photo shop was located over a saloon. Wanted posters were made from the photo and distributed throughout the West. Butch Cassidy realized that the law was closing in, and it was only a matter of time until they'd all be caught or killed. His plans were to go to South America and start a new life. He asked if anyone wanted to go with him. The Sundance Kid and Etta Place, his girlfriend, were the only two to take up his offer. We know that Sundance and Etta Place was in New York City on February 1901. They visited the famous jewelry Tiffany's. There they purchased a lapel watch for Etta and a stick pin for Longabaugh. They posed for this picture at the famous D. Young's Portrait Studios. You can see Etta's lapel watch that she's wearing. If Sundance had known that 2 months later, on the 15th of May, wanted posters would be distributed by the Pinkertons from the Fort Worth photo, he would have been reluctant to have had this picture made. On February the 20th, 1901, Harry Longabaugh, Robert Leroy Parker, and Etta Place boarded a British ship heading for Buenos Aires, Argentina. Butch was traveling as James Ryan, brother of Etta Place, and Etta and Sundance will travel as Mr. and Mrs. Harry E. Place. Things will go well for the 3 bandits. They will attempt to become respectable ranch owners. These are actual pictures of the 3 on their ranch in Cholla, Argentina. In a letter, Butch wrote to friends in Utah. He said that we are a family of 3. He said we've leased land in west central Argentina, where we have 300 head of cattle, 1,500 sheep, and 25 saddle horses, 2 men to do the work, and a good 4-room house, stable and warehouse. We devote our time to the ranch and socialize with neighbors. Now, back home, things weren't going so well for the Wild Bunch without Butch's leadership. William Hughes Carver will be shot and killed April the 2nd, 1901, by Sheriff E.S. Bryant and detectives. He was being arrested for killing a man named Oliver Thornton. It was later revealed that Kid Curry was the actual killer. Harvey Logan, or Kid Curry as he was called, had met a working girl from Fanny Porter's brothel in San Antonio by the name of Della Moore, or sometimes she used the name Annie Rogers. It's believed they met sometime in 1898. Della would hide Kid Curry after his robberies and help resupply him. By 1900, Della had left prostitution and traveled with Carter to Tennessee, where they met up with Ben Kilpatrick and Laura Bullen. On October the 14th, 1901, Della Moore was arrested in Nashville for trying to pass notes associated with robberies. She was jailed but acquitted 6 months later in June of 1902. To our knowledge, Curry and Della never reunited. While in jail, Curry kills 2 Knoxville policemen while trying to get away. It's believed that Della eventually returned to Fanny Porter's in San Antonio and died in 1926 at the age of 45. Kid Curry will die from self-inflicted gunshot wounds near Parachute, Colorado on June 7, 1901. He had helped rob the Denver and Rio Railroad. When a posse closed in, they say he killed himself. Now there's some question as to the identity of the dead outlaw. Pinkerton detective Charlie Siringo was so sure that they got the wrong man, he resigned from the detective agency in protest. Ben Kilpatrick and Laura Bullen will be arrested in St. Louis, Missouri on November the 18th, 1901. Laura will serve 3.5 years in Missouri State Pen, and Ben Kilpatrick will serve 10 years. Laura also is known as Della Rose. She'll move to Memphis in 1918 and live under an assumed name, Frida Lincoln. She'll pose as a war widow and work as a seamstress and dressmaker. She lived at 1374 Madison Avenue until passing away of heart trouble at the age of 85 on December the 2nd, 1961. She was the only woman that actually participated in Wild Bunch robberies dressed as a boy, and she could have told us who Etta Place really was. After Ben Kilpatrick got out of prison, it's believed that he committed several train robberies around Memphis and that he lived in Memphis for a while. It's been said that Laura Bullen and Kilpatrick never met again after leaving prison, but it does seem suspicious that they both spent time in Memphis. Unable to make a big score, Ben and Ola Hobeck returned to Texas. On March the 12th, 1912, they stopped an express train and used the methods learned by the Wild Bunch, uncoupling the passenger cars from the express car and carrying it 2 miles ahead. Hobeck watched the engineer while Kilpatrick took the express manager and a man named David Thornsdale back to the Wells Fargo express car. As they walked past an open car, Trousdale grabbed an ice mallet and stuck it under his overcoat. When Kilpatrick bent down to check the express bag and resting his rifle on his knee, Trousdale hit him over the head, killing him immediately. Then, waiting for Hobeck to come check on Kilpatrick, they shot and killed Hobeck with Kilpatrick's gun. The 2 outlaws were taken to the next town where they were stood up and photographed. Other Wild Bunch members were either in prison or dead. As Butch, Sundance, and Etta were feeling secure and content on their Cholla farm and ranch, Longabaugh and Etta felt safe enough to return to the United States in February of 1902. It's believed that they boarded the SS Soldier Prince for New York City. They visited Longabaugh's family in New Jersey, and on April the 2nd they registered at Mrs. Thompson's boarding house in New York. They then traveled to Buffalo to Dr. Pierce's Invalid Hotel. for unknown medical reasons, probably the real reason for the trip. They had their famous photo reprinted while in Buffalo. Then they traveled to Denver for medical treatment. Etta had spent time at the Denver hospital for unspecified reasons back in 1900. On July the 10th, 1902, it's believed the couple boarded the steamer Honduras, posing as Mr. and Mrs. Stewart, and on August the 9th, they were registered at the Europa Hotel in Buenos Aires. They then returned to the Cholo Ranch on the 15th. This is a photo taken in 1903 of Sundance, Etta, and Butch at their Cholo Ranch having tea. The photo was sent to family members in the United States and remained in their possession for years. That same year in 1903, Sundance wrote a letter to his family, not knowing that the Pinkertons were keeping an eye on mail. They knew for the first time that the outlaws were in Argentina, and the Pinkertons will notify their agent, Frank DeMaio, who was in Argentina on another case. He will have wanted posters printed up and spread throughout the country, although he'll never even come close to the outlaws. According to Pinkerton's files, in the summer of 1904, Harry Longabaugh and Etta Place will again return to the United States. They'll be traced to Fort Worth, Texas, and to the St. Louis World's Fair. They'll return to Argentina before they're discovered. It's possible that they may have made a trip to the doctor, but there's no record of it. In 1905, English-speaking bandits held up the Argentine Southern Land Manager of 5,000 pesos. Some believe that it was Robert Evans and a man by the name of either Gray or Wilson. However, by then, thanks to the Pinkerton wanted posters, all of Argentina was looking for the famous American bandits, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's known that Butch and Sundance were not the only Americans in Argentina capable of robbing banks. Their ranch provided security and seemed to be successful, and I've always wondered why would they start robbing and endangering that. We do know that a bank in Santa Cruz Province was robbed in 1905 and another robbery in 1907. Whether or not it was them, they got the credit for it. That year they sold their Cholo Ranch to a beef syndicate. In 1906, after losing their ranch, Etta and Sundance on June the 30th will leave Valparaiso, Chile for San Francisco. According to Pinkerton files, they do not believe that Etta ever returned to South America. Not much is known about Etta Place. Even the Pinkertons developed no information about her family and doubted that Etta Place was her real name. The possibility of her background was more likely associated with Madame Fanny Porter's brothel in San Antonio, where other Wild Bunch members found their girlfriends. Fanny Porter was known for her high-class girls. Pinkertons described Etta, or Ethel as she once signed her name, as being 27 or 28 years old, 5'4" or 5'5", weighing 110 to 115 pounds, medium built, brown hair. She was strikingly beautiful, they say, and spoke with elegance. On November the 3rd, 1908, several miles north of San Vicente, Bolivia, where a courier from the Argentine silver mine was transporting the company's payroll by mules, was robbed by two American bandits. 3 days later, on the 6th, the two outlaws rode into San Vicente, a small, out-of-the-way mining village. Unknown to the outlaws, word had already reached the small village about the payroll robbery. They rented a place to stay from a man that became suspicious of the two gringos and reported it to the local police. One of the pack mules was identified as belonging to the Argentine Mining Company. Now this is believed to be the last photo taken of Butch sitting on a mule, and Sundance is petting his mule. Now this is the building that the two bandits had rented. One of the officers was shot and killed when they came to question the two men. Soon other officers and Bolivian soldiers became involved in the shootout. Now this is a drawing of the location of the gunfight. Bullets would easily go through the adobe walls. When the battle subsided, San Vicente Mayor Cleo Belto reportedly hearing 3 screams of desperation, then 2 gunshots. The next morning, the one thought to be Sundance was laying against the wall with bullet wounds to his body and a gunshot to the head. The one thought to be Butch Cassidy was laying on the floor with a bullet hole in his temple. It was surmised that Butch had shot Sundance and then himself. They were identified as the 2 that robbed the Arameo payroll. However, they were never identified as Butch and Sundance, and was buried in an unmarked grave in the local cemetery. Now the question is, was it really them? William Pinkerton, head of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, heard of the San Vicente shootout, but dismissed the whole thing as a fake. Pinkerton files show that they continued to look for Butch and Sundance years after the San Vicente gunfight. In 1921, Pinkerton is said to have told one of his agents that the last he had heard of Sundance was in jail in Peru for bank robbery and that Butch had gotten away. Then there's Bruce Chadwin. He stated that the president of Bolivia, René Barrientos, from 1966 until 1969 as president, was an old Western outlaw enthusiast, and that he had ordered a team of investigators to investigate the gunfight at San Vicente. The president even accompanied the team, and they spoke with people, checked police records and military records, even exhumed a couple of the graves, and concluded that the gunfight never took place. In 1991, a television crew from the series Nova went to San Vicente and dug up the graves that was believed to be Butch and Sundance's for DNA testing. It was not them. However, they could still be possibly somewhere in the cemetery. The most compelling evidence to suggest that Butch Cassidy returned to the United States is the numerous witnesses that stated that they knew that Butch, or Robert Leroy Parker from the old days, and said that they met him in the 1920s when he returned to Baggs, Wyoming, his old stumping grounds, and that he stayed and visited with old friends for a few days. The daughter of Butch's old friend, Matt Warner, said that Butch showed up at her house looking for Matt, and that she had to tell him that her father had passed away, but that he had told her plenty of stories about him and the Wild Bunch. She said that he wrote her several letters after that under an assumed name. She said that Butch had told her that he was never going back to Circleville again because his sister Lula was so mad at him for the way that he had hurt his mother. This helps corroborate the story that Lula said that he had returned home. Now, Josephine Bassett stated in 1965 that Butch and Elzy Lay had visited her at Rock Springs, Wyoming in the early 1920s. Butch and Elzy knocked on her door, she said, one night. They had a few drinks and talked about old times. Now, this story to me rings true because she could have easily said, if she was making up a story, that it was Butch and Sundance that showed up. If Butch was alive, I know undoubtedly that he would have contacted Elzy Lay. To me, the most compelling evidence of all comes from Butch Cassidy's younger sister, Lula Parker Bentison. In her book, Butch Cassidy, My Brother, published in 1975, Lula related the story of Robert Leroy returning to visit his family in Circleville, Utah in 1925. She said that Butch stopped by the old home place here to find it empty. The Parkers still owned the ranch, but Max Parker, Butch's dad, had moved into a much better home in Circleville, and nobody ever asked where the money come from. Butch stopped in his new Model T Ford and guide out at the old Parker ranch. He saw his brother Mark Parker working on a fence. When he got closer to Mark, Mark recognized him. They hugged and talked for a few minutes. Then they drove into town to their father's, Max Parker's house. Lula stated that her dad was in his 80s and was sitting outside on the back kitchen steps when they drove up. Max was concerned, she said, when he saw Mark get out of the passenger side because he knew that Mark had rode a horse down to the ranch that morning. As Butch got closer, Mr. Parker recognized his oldest son. They sent for Lula. She was young when Butch had left. Maximilian Parker said to his daughter, "I bet you don't know who this is. This is your brother, Robert Leroy." Her brother, she said, was bothered because he felt bad that all the things that he did in his life had broken his mother's heart. She said no matter what they was talking about, that he would eventually come back to Mother. Mrs. Parker had passed away in 1905. She said that Butch stayed for several days before leaving. The mountains around Circleville, Utah, looked to me a lot like Chola, Argentina. I wonder if Butch thought so. Lula said that Robert Leroy died somewhere in the Northwest in 1937. She said that Mr. Parker, Maximilian, asked his children to never reveal where Butch was buried. He said that Robert Leroy had been chased all of his life, and now he's going to rest. Lula kept that promise by stating in her book that he's buried somewhere in the Northwest and hinted at a possible name, but never saying for sure. I know that Lula Benderson did not believe in lying. However, in order to keep her promise to never reveal Butch's grave, she was capable of misleading. Some of the stories she relayed in the book must be taken with a grain of salt. She didn't care about those stories. She accomplished her goal to let the world know that her brother did not die in Bolivia. She even had a strong disagreement with Robert Redford and Paul Newman over that point while they was making their movie. It's only normal, even if you must mislead, to want to come as close to telling the truth as you can. And on July the 24th, 2006, columnist Lee Benson of the Utah Desert News said that he stopped in Circleville and spoke with locals that had known Lula before she passed away. He said they told that Lula told a different story to people she knew than she did to reporters. Lula told local people that she could walk from where she was at and put her hand on Butch's grave. This statement I believe, and the fact Butch regretted hurting his mother so bad, and Maximilian asking his children not to reveal the location of his grave, I will say right now that I don't know where Butch Cassidy is buried, but I do believe that if it had been left up to Lula Parker Benderson, she would have buried her brother's ashes near or on their mother's grave.